are listening to the Up and Under podcast, starting in 3, 2, 1.
Yo, what's up, guys? Welcome into the Up and Under podcast. I'm your host, Hani. Join with me, as always, it's Zeeshan.
Yo.
All right, man. It's a sad time. It's a conversation that we did not want to have, nor did we expect to have, at least not at this point in the season. But unfortunately, it's that time where we need to start talking about what's wrong with some teams.
Yep.
And this is a very sensitive one for us because, but we are critical of this team. You know, as much as we love this team, as we support this team, we keep it real. You know, we're not these bandwagon fans. You know.
Yep.
Yeah. So we wanted to take this opportunity in this episode to talk about what's wrong with two teams that are struggling, that had higher expectations, that things are just not going well, and what are some of the next steps that these teams can take. And those two teams are the Toronto Raptors and the Chicago Bulls.
We're a far cry away from what this is. For our audio listeners, we're pointing to the championship banner.
Yeah.
2019.
Yeah, like we're nowhere near a championship level. But the thing with the Raptors is that it's just it hasn't been what we expected them to be. Before we even get into that, if you haven't already done so, subscribe to the show on all the various platforms. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher Radio, and of course on YouTube. Definitely subscribe so you don't miss more great episodes like this in the near future. But starting us off with the Toronto Raptors. Now, the Raptors currently, at the time of this recording, are 13-18. They are currently playing a game at this time, so this record could be outdated. But they are currently 10th in the Eastern Conference, and that's not even the biggest news, man. They're on a 6-game losing streak where they lost to the Orlando Magic twice back-to-back, by the way. Got blown out in one of those games. That wasn't pretty. Lost to the Sacramento Kings, who, granted, have improved, but they're still the Sacramento Kings. Then lost to the Brooklyn Nets, lost to the Philadelphia 76ers, and most recently to the Golden State Warriors. Sorry, I flipped that around. They lost to the Warriors first, and then they lost to the Sixers. But you get the idea. The Raptors currently on a 6-game losing streak. Now, statistically, the Raptors, they're not bad per se. They're 14th in offensive rating, 16th in defensive rating. You know, those metrics aren't really terrible, and they're 22nd in points per game and 8th in opponents' points per game. You know, those are kind of what the Raptors were last year, which is the interesting part about this team is that they've just looked underwhelming, you know, to start the season, despite their record being similar. I mean, although now it's lower than what it was at this time last season, you know. And honestly, it's not all bad. I'll start with the good because there are some good things that the Raptors have going for them, though not many. First of which, Pascal Siakam. He's been playing like an absolute he's playing like an all-star, an absolute lock for All-NBA if he keeps this up. And again, despite even him going down with injury, he just seems to he hasn't lost that step. He's continued his great play. He's literally been the brightest spot for the Raptors this season.
He's at that next level phase of, you know, when that all-star player takes the next step forward into solidifying himself as a top. He's definitely at least top 15 this season. There's even a discussion now within Toronto circles of, is he better than Chris Bosh was? I would say, in terms of Toronto Chris Bosh, I would say Pascal Siakam is better. Now, if we want to talk about peak Miami Chris Bosh, that's a different story. Yeah. Because Eric Spoelstra really got a lot out of Chris Bosh that Toronto wasn't able to. But I think, yeah, we're talking about like one of the top 5 best players in Raptors history at this point with Pascal Siakam and how he's currently playing.
Yeah, and he's been great. I mean, both ends of the floor, he's been super consistent for the team. So Pascal has been awesome this season. The second bright spot for the Raptors has been OG Anunoby, who seems to have taken a step forward. He's expanded his offensive game, and over time, especially when Pascal was out, you saw how OG was able to, increase his offensive game and really helped the Raptors in that period of time when we were like, holy shit, Pascal's out, what are we supposed to do now? But OG stepped up. Not only is he still playing at an all-defensive level on that side of the floor, but offensively, you can tell He's more confident driving. He's no longer just settling for 3-point shots. He's utilizing his frame. He's adding things like the spin move to his repertoire. So OG has been solid. And actually, OG missed a few games himself these over the last few weeks. And the Raptors defense has completely plummeted without him. So that just shows how valuable he is. And again, even with just Pascal, he can't do it by himself. More on that later. But OG has been a great bright spot for the team. And then not to mention, back to stats, they're first in turnovers. They have the lowest turnover rate in the league, so they don't really turn the ball over. They're fifth in offensive rebounds. So last season, the Raptors were also a top offensive rebounding team. So they're still keeping that up. So they don't turn the ball over. They still crash the glass and get their second chance opportunities. But that's basically where the good of this team kind of stops. And it's becoming more and more apparent that the negatives are far outweighing the positives with this team. And getting into some of the negatives or the bad of this team, first and foremost, I can just end it right here. They lost to the Orlando Magic twice in a row.
Listen, to be fair, Orlando's been on what? As of right now, I think they're on like a 6-game winning streak or something.
Are they trying to win?
They've semi-turned around their season. There's no way that they're not going to tank by the end of the season. But they have solidified themselves and their future in terms of what it could possibly look like. And listen, like Bobo, Paolo, Franz Wagner is like amazing, bro. That guy is really good.
What happened to Mo?
And again, it's also coincided with Markelle Fultz coming back. He's a big part of their team, even though he doesn't necessarily put up the stat sheet production that you would expect from a number one pick. But he's been very important for the team. So their team is playing really well. It's just, it also coincided with us starting their winning streak.
Yeah. Well, actually, no. They beat a few teams before us. They beat like the Clippers and another team before us as well. But that's not even the point. The Orlando Magic are not trying to win games. They're not trying to win games. If you can name, I don't know, maybe 8 Orlando Magic players, I'll give you a ton of credit. Because let's be honest, that's not what their aim is. Yes, they're accumulating some young talent. They have some good players there. But that's not, like, the fact that the Raptors lost to a team like that, to me,
Twice
in a row, and one of them you got blown out. That's just inexcusable. But why did they lose those games? Well, a big reason is because they can't shoot for their life right now. In previous years, the Raptors were a bad shooting team, a poor shooting team, but they made up for it in other areas. Their defense, their hustle, their rebounding, and that made up for it. But this season, they're not getting those positives, and their shooting is just even worse. They're 29th in 3-point percentage and 28th in field goal percentage. That's just bad.
They're also average on free throw percentage as well, which means they're not hitting their free throws at a high enough rate.
Despite them being I think they're top 10 in attempts. So they're getting to the line. They're just not making them. So that's even worse.
It's funny because when we think about the beginning of the season, the Raptors were shooting amazing. And all of us realists out there were like, wait for the averages to average out. Yeah. And it's averaged out very hard.
Yeah, I think it just went right past the average and went right down. Like, it's not been pretty. And a lot of that has to do with guys, like their actual main shooters, like Fred VanVleet and Gary Trent Jr., really, really struggling this season. Like
OG has also struggled. Now, granted, he has that hand injury that has been affecting his shooting, but again, that doesn't help.
But OG's still shooting at least 35%. At least he's shooting league average. Guys like Fred VanVleet is shooting like 28%, like 22. Like they're shooting Russell Westbrook level right now, and that is when no player in this era wants to be at right now. Gary Trent Jr., he's on and off, but he's also been struggling with his jump shot. Fred's just looks broken. Like it's not the same. He's missing wide open looks. And those two guys are your main two guards. And then you factor in that a second-year player in Scotty Barnes has struggled. He's really hit the sophomore slump where things aren't coming as easily. Teams are game planning for him. And I also think he is hampered a little bit. I think the injury is there. But again, if Zeeshan pointed this to me earlier, he's still playing. So if you're playing, if you're out there, if you're good enough to play, then you got to still perform.
And again, the Raptors medical staff are notoriously conservative with the amount that they let.
Oh yeah, we invented load management. Like,
exactly.
Like we invented that.
Like
shit.
any little injury, the Raptors staff seems to have always like pulled out a player.
Yeah.
So if they're letting Scotty Barnes go with this, that means it's not big enough for it to be an issue to honestly complain about.
Yeah, and I think again we always forget Scotty had a great year last year, But he is a second-year player, and he is going to eventually hit walls. It's up to the player to overcome those things. And right now, that's not what he's doing. He's struggling. He's on and off. There are moments when we see the old Scotty Barnes come back, but again, it's hit or miss depending on the game. And the fact that those three guys that I just named are all starters is very telling and very concerning.
Well, Gary Trent Jr. was a starter, but he's basically a six man now. So
yeah, like again,
key
like
players.
Like listen, like these are 2-3 top guys that we have on the team. And, and then you factor in, and we brought up the fact that Scotty might be banged up, might not be, but the Raptors, them as a whole, have had so many injuries this season. And I'm not making any excuses. You play with what you got. But this year, the injury gods have really, really affected the Raptors.
I think it's been this way for a while, to be honest. It's been like this for a number of seasons. It's just we didn't have the players that were playing struggling as hard as we do now.
Yeah, that's fair. But, like, let's be honest with you. The numbers don't lie. The Raptors have the fourth most injured players throughout the season so far. Sixth most games lost to injuries. So Fred VanVleet and Gary Trent Jr. have missed about 20% of the season each. Pascal Siakam missed about a third. Precious Achiuwa has missed nearly 2/3 of the season. And their top free agent signing, Otto Porter, has missed literally like 3/4 of the season so far.
Again, that's kind of expected.
I mean, it's kind of to be expected with Otto Porter. But, like, let's be honest. The Raptors have used 17 different starting lineups. And they've just played, over 30? This is like game like 31? Something like that. And, like, that's telling, man. That's telling. For the fact that the Raptors they've had to work with so little. And a lot of that comes back down to the fact that this Raptor team, although on paper we expected some internal growth, we expected the team to be better, there just isn't really guard depth that Nick Nurse really trusts on the court. Like Malachi Flynn, recently he's been picking it up, but even Delano Banton, Jeff Doughton, those guys aren't really guys that Nick Nurse is going to trust on a nightly basis. And you pair that with the fact that your starting guards are struggling, it basically it doesn't help that situation.
Half your team is missing, basically.
Pretty much. And, the reality is that that has been a big hole the Raptors haven't really addressed over the last couple of seasons.
I mean, to be fair, they've tried addressing it with Malachi Flynn, Delano Banton. I like Jeff Doughton, but I mean he's like a borderline NBA player, at least from what we've seen from him. He's a two-way guy right now. Like he's on. And so the problem becomes, again, Malachi Flynn. I think he's taken a step forward in terms of his offense. He's definitely much more better on that end of the floor. The problem is his defense is still he's never gonna be a great defender. And with a guy like Fred VanVleet, for example, who's not the fastest guy, he's pretty short on an NBA level. His hands are what separates him defensively and his strength. Malachi Flynn has neither of those things, unfortunately. Yeah. So it becomes very hard for Nick Nurse to trust Malachi Flynn, especially when he doesn't hit his shots in a game.
Yeah, no, it's true. And again, I've been a big supporter of Malachi Flynn. I wanted to see him have success, but there's some instances, moments where you're just not a good fit for the team. And I just don't think he's a player that A, Nick Nurse trusts enough, and B, fits the type of defensive schemes that the Raptors are trying to run. And Delano Banton, again, he's shown flashes of being a good player. Obviously, being a Toronto-born draft pick is always great, but he still needs refinement. He still needs to develop, and he's just not there yet. So they don't have really a lot of guard depth. Speaking of younger players, they're relying on a rookie center in Christian Koloko to play big minutes right off the bat. Like, none of us, when we drafted Christian Koloko, really expected him to be a rotation contributor right away. We all expected him to go to the G League, maybe, do well there, have some success there, get some confidence. And then maybe next season, maybe near the end of the season, maybe call him up. But Nick Nurse has literally been starting him half the games, because they needed a spark, they needed a combination, or they just literally had nobody else. And that, to me, has been a big factor, is the fact that we have bigs, but again, Nick Nurse doesn't really trust them, or they don't fit the team. They don't play the way Nick Nurse wants them to. And
when we go down the list, Christian Koloko, again, credit to him. He's been better than what we thought he would be.
Oh, yeah.
But he's just not that player yet.
He's
when we look at our center depth, you have your Kem Birch, who's always injured.
Even when he's not. I mean, he doesn't really give you much on the offensive end. Defensively, he's not really as effective in certain matchups. I like Kem Birch, but again, like, there isn't really much he can really provide you.
And last year we were playing Precious, who is currently injured.
Yeah.
So
And even Precious has his limitations. He's undersized. He's prone to making offensive mistakes. I mean, Precious is a young player himself. So the Raptors, they like, not only do they not have the guards that we thought they would have, the big men have not been there as well. And I don't consider Chris Boucher a big man anymore because you really can't play him against centers defensively. You can't play him against centers. You really can't play him against bigger power forwards. So Chris Boucher has now just become a wing player, and he can't shoot. So that's been a problem. I like Thaddeus Young just being the veteran presence, but again, Thad isn't even looking to score.
And again, like, bro, if you're relying on Thad Young at this point, it's an issue.
He's 36 years old, man. Like, he's too old for this crap. But again, Thad has been a bright spot as well for the team. And so the fact of the matter is that the roster is pretty imbalanced. They have too many players and roster spots that either, again, like I mentioned, Nick Nurse doesn't trust them, or they're just not good enough, or they don't play the way the Raptors want to warrant a consistent rotational spot. And that leads into how the Raptors have played recently.
Well, I would say one more thing is also the starts, whether it's at the start of the game or during the third quarter.
Yeah.
The starts coming out of the locker room have been bad. I think, unfortunately, that points to a coaching issue. Like, when you can't get off to a good start, I think that's a clear telltale sign that there's some sort of imbalance in terms of the game plan and what's actually going on, or the coaches unfortunately are just not doing a great job. Well, I don't want to be a Nick Nurse blamer, but if we're passing the blame around, the coach has also got to have some of the blame.
Oh, no. He definitely has some blame to play in this as well. I mean, again, that was the point I was going to bring up as well, was the fact that in this last recent stretch, either they've had too many third quarter collapses or they've had really poor starts. And I think some of that can be attributed to the chemistry being off because, again, injuries, Nurse has been just trying different lineup combinations, and no guys have really been able to get a feel for each other. That could play in a factor, but it's up to a head coach and Nick Nurse to manage that and to really, put some more trust into guys. I think, there are moments where, yes, you're going to have to live with, a Delano Banton's mistakes or Malachi Flynn's mistakes in order to allow them to grow. And that's the fine line that the Raptors are walking on right now, where they want to develop players, but they still want to win. And that's a very, very fine line. It's great when it works, but it's when it doesn't work, you end up in situations like the Raptors are currently in right now. So where do the Raptors go from here? Like, what are some potential solutions to the Raptors' problems? And to be honest with you, there really isn't many solutions that I could think of beyond got to make a big trade. Got to make a big trade. You got to balance out this roster. And I think at this point, the Raptors, in my opinion, have been too conservative. I know Masai Ujiri's not a mortgage the future kind of guy. Bobby Webster neither the same way. But I think it's time to stop worrying about the future and worrying about the now. Like, we were talking about a Pascal Siakam, an OG Anunoby. These guys are entering the primes of their careers. And Pascal is going to be a free agent after the 2024 season. So we have to convince him to re-sign with us. It's not the situation like it was before, where Pascal was an up-and-comer and we were able to re-sign him and extend him on his rookie deal. He's going to be a bona fide superstar. A lot of teams are going to be interested in him. So now we have to prove to them, hey, we can build around you. We want to keep you around. So I think make first round picks available. Raptors have all their picks. Make a expiring deal, maybe like a Gary Trent Jr. available for a trade. And again, I would say anyone not named Scotty Barnes, Pascal Siakam, and maybe OG Anunoby, depending on the conversation, is up for a conversation. I just think at this point, you have to make a move. Either you try to go for the center of the future, you get the guy who's going to be a part of your core going forward, or get another guard who Nick Nurse can truly trust and rely on. At this point, we've gone too long without either of those positions. I know the 6'9" movement is great, and it's a nice tool to have in your repertoire, but it can't be the only thing that defines you. You have to have other elements, you have to have other layers, and it's high time the Raptors start addressing those positions and maybe get some shooting, although they've tried to address those issues, with an Otto Porter and stuff, but it just hasn't worked out. So Yeah, that's kind of where we're at right now. And I'd even say trade away some of the wasted players. We've kind of mentioned them. The redundant players, the guys we don't need, like the Malachi Flynns, the Kem Birches. And I'd even argue I might be time to move off of Chris Boucher because we need to get, maybe just for salary purposes, just because we need to get more guys who we can consistently rely on in the rotation. And yeah, who those players would be, I was having a tough time finding potential trades that I think would work. But here are some names that I think the Raptors could target. Miles Turner has been a guy who we brought up on the show a bunch of times. He's definitely a good name. I just don't know how much the Pacers are going to be willing to let him go.
Especially now that he's playing like pretty well with their core.
Yeah, like he's established himself as a big part of his core. The only reason why it's the Pacers trading him is maybe because they don't want to pay him because he's on an expiring deal this season. But Miles Turner is definitely an interesting one. Bring back a familiar face in Jakob Poeltl from the Spurs. Now, that's been the most talked about rumor. But again, Jakob Poeltl, he has a ceiling. We drafted him. We know what he's about. But he's credit to him. He's developed himself very nicely in San Antonio. But again, he's on an expiring deal, so you're going to have to pay Jakob next year. Maybe going after a guy like Doug McDermott would help the shooting issues with the Raptors. But again, he's not really a guy for the defensive side of things, but maybe taking a risk and getting a shooter might help open up the offense a little bit more. And the fact that the Raptors have other defensive guys, they could make it work. Similar situation for a guy like Buddy Hield. Only difference being is Buddy Hield is a lot more expensive. But if you have Buddy Hield, take on Buddy Hield's deal, potentially also get a Miles Turner, it could work. Free up some space for the Pacers, give them some draft compensation. It might make the deal worth it for them. Another name would be John Collins. Now, I don't know how well this would work, considering the fact that he's not a center, but he's 6'9", he's super athletic, under team control for the next 4 years. I think he fits the Raptors' defensive schemes. I think the Raptors can make John Collins an even better defensive player. But again, I don't know how the fit will work. I don't know why the Hawks would make the trade. That's one of the things that is tough, but he's definitely an interesting one to keep an eye on. A guy who I really like and I think the Raptors should look into is Cole Anthony. I think he's a steady hand. He can be a solid backup point guard for the team. Again, it just really depends on what. And the Magic, the Orlando Magic have a lot of guards. They have a lot of point guards. They still have, again, Markelle Fultz, Jalen Suggs. Again, you can probably use Paolo Banchero, the pseudo point guard as well. So they have the guard depth right now, so they could maybe make a guy like Cole Anthony expendable, especially if the Raptors are willing to part with draft compensation. So he would be an option. Even picking up a guy like Terrence Ross again to help the shooting. Ross familiar with the organization. They know him. They know what he can do. But again, Ross isn't really shooting that well this season, so depends. Another name would be Monty Morris from the Wizards. He'd be another steady hand, someone who can stretch the floor. Could be a solid backup point guard for the team. Jordan Clarkson has been another big name that has been floating around out there. He's your typical bench gunner. The only thing that I'm worried about with Jordan Clarkson is he just going to be Gary Trent Jr. 2.0, where some nights he's hot, some nights he's cold?
Well, that's the issue with bench gunners.
Yeah, like it really, really depends. And another name from the Utah Jazz is Mike Conley, who, again, aging veteran point guard, but knows how to play, willing to win. He's shown he has the capability to defend. And it might be if Utah be willing to part with his contract, and part with another asset if we're willing to take on Mike Conley's contract. So those are some of the names that I think the Raptors could do, but overall the message is clear. They need to make a big trade. Otherwise, they can just maybe get healthier and hope their fortunes turn back. I mean, over the last 6 games, in the 6-game losing streak, 4 of those losses have been losses that have been under 5 points. So the Raptors aren't losing close games. They just, maybe with some of the guys back, maybe they can start winning some of those matchups. But again, that's wishful thinking. But bottom line to me is that the top guys got to play better. Fred VanVleet got to play better. Gary Trent Jr. has got to play better. Scotty Barnes got to play better. Unless those guys step their game back up, or the Raptors make a big move, I just don't see this team, getting out of this honestly pretty dark situation that they're in.
Yeah, I mean, the Raptors, again, they're not in a great situation right now, but what you can at least say for the Raptors is that they have some building blocks moving forward. this isn't a make or break season for them. So in terms of teams that are struggling, I think the Raptors are pretty high on the list of those teams in terms of their like lack of urgency, right? The Raptors are not in a terrible spot right now. A team that is in a worse spot though than the Raptors for sure is the Chicago Bulls.
We called this, by the way, just
We called this
FYI.
what 2 years ago, 3 years ago, whenever they signed DeRozan and all that.
Well, yeah, that was like a year or two ago. Yeah.
Yeah. The Chicago Bulls are currently in a bad situation, particularly when you factor in the expectations that were placed on this team this year and especially last year as well. Currently they're 12 and 18th, 12 and 18. They're 11th in the Western or Eastern Conference. They're 20th in offensive rating and 15th in points per game, so they're not good offensively. Defensively, they're 17th in defensive rating. They're also 24th in rebounding, which is an interesting stat that I'll talk about afterwards as well. And they're 26th in three-point attempts, which is kind of expected when you have a DeMar DeRozan-led team, though he has been shooting more threes in these last few seasons. They are 10th in percentage-wise from three, but again, they only shoot. They're bottom 5 in terms of three-point shots taken. And in terms of Chicago, again, like I was saying, they came into last season especially with a lot of expectations about being a far-reaching team in the Eastern Conference playoffs. And unfortunately, they've really slid since basically Lonzo Ball got injured. And again, I don't think they were as good as what they showed at the beginning of last season. And we said that last season, and I've maintained that ever since. I think they were not to be harsh, but they were an overrated team to begin with. I don't think they were as good as what the hype for them was.
Well, we saw it near the end at the end of the season. Like they couldn't be good teams. Like even despite them having, a a decent looking record, they weren't beating anyone good. So it's like they basically were pretty fraudulent in everyone's eyes by the end of the season.
Again, a lot of their success had to do with Lonzo Ball and Alex Caruso being defensive monsters at the guard positions, and that really made up for the lack of, for example, rim protection on their team and their lack of wing defense, especially coming from their swingmen and DeMar DeRozan and Zach LaVine. So their guard play with Lonzo Ball and Alex Caruso in terms of the playmaking, their shooting, their defense was really what was driving their team, and DeMar DeRozan was finishing out possessions with the scoring. Same with Zach LaVine. Unfortunately, when Lonzo Ball got injured, that's when all of their issues really started to show up. And unfortunately for Lonzo, it's one of those situations where it's just been really bad in terms of you don't know when he's going to come back, if he's going to come back. To be honest, how he's going to look if he ever comes back. Like,
his knees are shot.
His knees are very much in a bad position right now. So ever since that happened, Chicago's kind of been on a slide and a downward trend, and they haven't recovered for that. Speaking of Nikola Vucevic, the Chicago Bulls have a big man issue. Now, for Vucevic's part, he's been better this season. Actually, he's been quietly pretty solid for the Chicago Bulls this season. He's doing his usual thing on the offensive end. Again, the problem with Nikola Vucevic is that he's just not a good defender. And when you're adding that to the fact that you have a DeMar DeRozan and a Zach LaVine on the wings, plus no more Lonzo Ball, it becomes a really big issue for the team when they can't finish out possessions at the rim on the defensive end. And as I said before, 24th in rebounding. So Nikola Vucevic has never been a great rebounder at his size either. And so when you're relying on a Nikola Vucevic to hold the back line of your defense with a DeMar DeRozan and a Zach LaVine covering for him, you're not going to be a good defensive team, and which is exactly what happened after Lonzo Ball got injured last season. As I said, the team is already bad defensively. Nikola Vucevic, for his part, has been one of the better players, but he doesn't help on the defensive end. Then on top of that, in terms of your big men, you have a hole at the power forward spot, which you haven't filled from last year. Now, granted, Javonte Green has been, I think, a revelation for them in terms of the fact that he was basically a two-way player before he came to Chicago Bulls, and he established himself as a pretty solid role player in the NBA. But if you're running Javonte Green and Patrick Williams, who has played better as of late, but Chicago fans were previously calling for his head, basically. If you're relying on those two guys next to Nikola Vucevic in the starting lineup, or in terms of your main big man rotation, you have a huge issue. And that's primarily what has been plaguing the Chicago Bulls.
Well, I mean, speaking on the big man, I mean, we kind of called this when the Bulls traded for Vucevic, and like, sure, it was a good, like, we looked at it at the time as like, okay, they're taking a win now move, they want to go out there, but then we also looked at the fact that Vucevic is older, he's getting older, he's on an expensive contract, and does he really fit? You know, like, does it really work? And that at the time, that was even before DeRozan even got there, and there was just LaVine and Vooch, like. You already had LaVine, who wasn't really a great defender, and then you pair that with Vooch. It's like, what did we really expect it to work? And then you add DeRozan on there as well, who's also not a great defender. So I mean, I think what made smooth things over was the fact that Caruso and Lonzo were supposed to be there to make up for those guys. Like, they're not the offensive guys. Those guys will play the defense. The other three will play the offense. I think that's what their plan was. But clearly, that's just not how it played out.
And again, the hope with Vucevic, for example, was that, you know, his pick and roll offense would really help the Chicago Bulls out. But prior to their two guards, there was nobody to get Nikola Vucevic the ball. So it was kind of an issue in terms of his pick and roll play was not good. And granted, Vucevic wasn't making shots last year either. And then you add the two guards, and then you have the playmaking, which is why it was working so well. But then Lonzo gets injured. And now you have one less defender, one less playmaker to put Zach LaVine, DeMar, Vooch in those spots. Now, DeMar, for his part, has gone much better as a playmaker. But again, that's not naturally what you kind of want from him on a possession-by-possession basis.
DeMar's not a pick-and-roll player. He's not. He's not a pick-and-roll playmaker. He'll use the pick-and-roll to attack the basket, but that's about it. And he needs the spacing in order to make it work. So more likely than not, you're better off when you're playing with DeMar, you're better off doing a pick-and-pop. But again, Vucevic isn't really much of a shooter, you know.
Well, he's rebounded this season in terms of his percentages.
But that's not who he is. You want him near the basket.
Exactly. And then we got to talk about Zach LaVine. Now, Zach LaVine, unfortunately for Chicago Bulls fans, again, when we talk about injuries, I think those injuries last season really affected him. We'll see, hopefully, next season how he looks, because this season it's really looked like those injuries have affected his knees. He can still jump out the building on a random possession, but in terms of him getting the ball, being able to drive, his drives are down, his percentages are all down. And again, that points to the fact that it's just the knees have worn him down a little bit, right? As I said, I think he needs a season to recover. But again, the problem with the Chicago Bulls is they were supposed to be good this season, and they are not currently good. As I was saying, he seemed to have still not recovered. His stats are down. And what's even worse is that his chemistry issues are now affecting the team on a whole. That's kind of what happens when a player tries to come back from injuries. We saw this with Klay Thompson as well. A player tries to come back from injuries, tries to regain his form, and it's just not working. And then what happens is you have chemistry issues with the rest of the team, and this has resulted in, for example, there was a report recently about the team getting mad at Zach LaVine or calling him out at halftime or whatever it was in the locker room. They now have everyone in Chicago's talking about the lack of effort that Billy Donovan is getting his squad to play with. And again, I think this is just a symptom of the larger issue, which is that besides DeRozan, this team just is not that good. They have some quality names, and some quality players on an ideal basis, but overall this team is just not a very good team. When your best players are DeMar DeRozan, who's a maybe top 20, top 25 player in the league, but then Zach LaVine, who On his best day was an all-star. On his worst day, like right now, is not really being effective.
Well, let me put it this way. This was supposed to be Zach LaVine's team, and DeMar was supposed to be coming in to play with Zach LaVine. But now this has become DeMar's team. Like, that's the way I look at it now. I don't see it as LaVine's team because DeMar clearly been the more consistent player. And now, obviously, injuries have to play a factor in it. But DeMar's been the better player. Throughout the time that DeMar's been here, he's been the better player. This is his team. He's had more control over the locker room. And LaVine, he's gotten paid. A young guy got his money. Yeah, it's just one of those situations where, like, the guy, he's not the same guy. And doesn't mean that he can't regain that form, but as it stands right now, the Bulls are trying to win. They need him to regain that form, like, yesterday, you know?
Again, the best, ideally, like, DeRozan's like a third option on a championship winning team. Same with Zach LaVine. So if those guys are the guys that are leading your team, you're just not going to be a good overall team. That it just boils down to a fact as simple as that. Now, in terms of some solutions for the Chicago Bulls, I think it's much easier than when we were talking about the Toronto Raptors. The best solution is to just tear it all down. You can get some good assets for DeMar DeRozan. Obviously, he's a star player.
The Lakers would want him.
The Lakers would want him.
Lakers
He has
want
a year
everyone, though.
left on his contract as well. So, I mean, his contract isn't a long-term contract either. You can see what the market is for Nikola Vucevic. He does have an expiring contract. So, a team could, for example, get him to fill a void or whatnot.
Maybe Orlando will take him back if they give him a draft pick.
Maybe. I mean, ideally you would look at the market for Zach LaVine as well, but I don't think there's any market for Zach LaVine. He's basically guaranteed $180 million over the life of his contract.
That contract's hard
Again,
to trade.
that last year is a player option for basically $50 million, but we all know he's not going to pass that up. And so you're basically owing him $180 million, and with the way he's playing right now, and I mean, the injury concerns are starting to pile up as well now, and so I don't think there is much of a market.
Yeah, you're not gonna get much value on that.
Lonzo is basically untradeable as well.
He's hurt.
You don't
Can't
know
trade
if
him.
he's even going to play in the NBA. Again, that's how bad his injuries seem. And then the good thing about Chicago is that they can go down the Brooklyn Nets route prior to when they got Kyrie and KD in terms of how the Brooklyn Nets retooled themselves taking on bad contracts. And that's primarily because of the fact that a lot of their depth pieces are expiring this year. Patrick Williams has a team option for $9 million next season. We'll see if the team picks it up. I think it's a safe bet that they'll pick it up. I don't see why not. Now, he has had his fair share of struggles, but you can see the potential with him. $9 million is a mid-level deal, damn near.
It's tradable.
And so, exactly, you have options to deal with that. Kobe White, Goran Dragic, Ayo Dosunmu, and Javonte Green are also all expiring. Those guys, with the exception of Goran Dragic, were all on the rookie deals. And so we'll see what the Chicago Bulls do with those guys. I think a safe bet would be that they try to bring back Ayo and Javonte Green because those two guys have been pretty good for them. Kobe White, we'll see. He's been up and down during his career. I think we kind of know what Kobe White as a player will be now as a kind of depth scorer off of the bench. And do you really need that if you're the Chicago Bulls on a rebuilding franchise? I don't think so. Goran Dragic, obviously higher ambitions.
Listen, Bulls fans, you can blame all your struggles that Goran Dragic put his stamp of higher ambitions on your team. I'm just saying. He left the Raptors and we started doing well after he left. I mean, minus now, but listen, I'm just saying, higher ambitions. That's all Goran Dragic was looking for.
The point is for Chicago, they have some avenues that they can pursue. They have some routes that they can take, but the problem is when you're paying Lonzo Ball and Zach LaVine the extent that you're paying them, it becomes tough. As I said, they can try to go down that Brooklyn route, or other teams I think that have done this. They have a couple of guys that they can't trade, so what do? They kind of gut the rest of the team. They retool a little bit. They don't full out tank because you can't tank with a couple good players on your team, so you kind of just bottom out a little bit, see what kind of draft picks you can get, take on bad contracts in exchange for taking on a couple of good picks from other teams. So, the Chicago Bulls are not completely at zero, but they're not in a good spot either.
Yeah, like their future just isn't promising enough to justify moving forward with this core, especially because half of it's aging. DeMar and Vooch are not getting any younger. Levine's health issues are piling up. Lonzo's health issues are even more of a concern. And so it just makes more sense for Arturas Karnisovas to just kind of wipe the slate, get his guys in there because, you know, I don't think Levine was the previous regime's one move, right? Yeah. So get more of his guys in there and see where that goes. So we'll see what happens with the Bulls, but definitely the Bulls and Raptors have had their fair share of struggles this season. But moving on to the up and under segment, a pretty short one for this week. First and foremost, are you up or under on the NBA stripping the New York Knicks of the 2025 second round pick because they tampered on the signing of Jalen Brunson? Remember that signing that was basically a done deal? We knew the exact amount, we knew the terms, we knew literally where Jalen Brunson was going to be living. Yeah, the New York Knicks tampered on that. So you're up or under?
I'm under for two reasons. Number one, everyone in the NBA tampers,
Listen,
Like
the Knicks couldn't even tamper properly when everyone tampered.
Well, same with Miami, right?
But they're the Knicks.
But again, my point is, first of all, everyone in the NBA tampers. Second of all, if the NBA wants to put a viable punishment for tampering, who cares about a second round pick like a few years down the line? Literally nobody cares, man.
I would have stripped their 2023 first. Like, screw it.
But again, like, there's no like. This is like one of those things that is just basically like
it's a slap on the wrist.
Yeah, it's like a little hey, we need to enforce the rules a little bit and keep up our image. Other than that, like, bro, like there's really like no point.
Listen, I just find it hilarious that the Knicks were the team that got caught because I'm like, you got caught tampering for Jalen Brunson, like.
And again, the thing is about you're talking about we knew the deal. The exact details of that deal before even free agency opened up.
Well,
the problem is when we're talking about tampering, we knew everyone's deals before the free agency opened up. On that first day, we knew everyone's deals that happened, right? So if you're going to enforce tampering, either enforce it on everyone or just get rid of it. And if you're going to enforce it properly, man. Like, nobody cares about second rounder in like 3 years. Bro.
Yeah, you're going to have to put a proper punishment on it. I'm just find it hilarious that the Knicks got caught.
And next up, are you up or under on the Robert Sarver selling the Phoenix Suns and Phoenix Mercury for an estimated combined $4 billion?
Damn, this is a tough one. Okay, I'm up that he's gone, but I'm under on the fact that basically like everyone who was forcing him to sell the teams, basically just allowed him to get a $4 billion payday. Like
that'll really show him.
Yeah, like that'll show him. Like sure, okay. Now the Suns get new ownership. There'll be a new voice. There'll be
hopefully less racist and all that other stuff.
We have one less bad owner in the NBA, hopefully. But Robert Sarver is fine. Like it's not like he's gonna learn his lesson or anything. This dude is still he just walked away with $4 billion. Like this dude's chilling. He's fine. Like.
Again, I get the fact that you can't kind of enforce it contractually for like to get rid of him, but like, I mean, it is what it is, but it's just it's not great.
Yeah, like I think it's good for the Phoenix Suns. It's good for that community to get a new owner in there because that's what they've wanted. And also, like, because we always considered Robert Sarver the James Dolan of the West.
Yeah.
But so that's always nice. It does reduce the clown shows that we get. Of NBA owners. But it's just if you look at it from the other perspective, it just really is just like it's again like back to the whole thing. Oh, it's a wrist slap. Like it's not a punishment for Robert Sarver.
That's not even a wrist slap, bro. They threw like this guy got whipped with cash is what happened.
Pretty much. Not even whipped. He basically just got just patted
silver
down.
Platter.
Like silver platter, like right down to him. But yeah, we'll see what happens. The Suns at least have we'll be getting a new regime, coming soon. But with that concludes this week's episode. We hope you guys enjoyed it. Definitely subscribe to the show on all the various platforms. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher Radio, and of course on YouTube. So definitely subscribe so you don't miss more great content from us in the near future. Obviously, the All-Star break is coming up within. All-Star voting will be starting up soon.
I think it already started.
It might have already started by the time we're recording this, but by the time you're watching this or listening to it. But stay tuned. We're going to be giving our all-star picks coming up soon. Maybe even talking about more trade deadline stuff as February approaches. So definitely stay tuned for more content on the way. So definitely subscribe to the show so you don't miss it. Also follow us on social media, Twitter and Instagram at UpLetterN_podcast, Facebook.com/UpAndUnderPodcast for all the latest updates whenever we post a new episode or reaction to news as they occur. Definitely follow us there for all the latest updates. Also, check out our website, UpAndUnderPodcast.com. It's our central hub for the show. It's a place where we write blog posts with every single episode, so if you don't have time to listen or watch the full episode, you can read about it on our website. So every one of our episodes on the website is featured with the video, the audio, and the blog all in one place, so you guys have everything in one centralized location. So definitely check that out if you haven't done so. And yeah, man, NBA Christmas Day game is coming up soon. Although again, once again, the Raptors don't have one. But you know what? This season, I'm kind of happy we don't have one.
We don't deserve one this season.
Not this year, but it's gonna be pretty exciting. And then of course, the new year, 2023, will be coming up very soon, and more excitement with the All-Star break and trade deadline will be coming following that. So stay tuned for those exciting things. But with that concludes this week's episode. We'll see you guys on the next one. Take it easy.
Easy.